Welcome everyone to the BioVerse number 28, titled China's Competitive Early Stage Clinical Development Capabilities Rewriting R&D Playbook. Depends where you are. Good day, good morning, good night, and thank you for attending another fantastic BioVerse webinar. Today is really my great pleasure to have such a prestigious panel of speakers to share this one of the hottest topic in our industry today. For those who don't know us, let me share a few quick slides so you have a little bit idea who we are, and so you can be more prepared for the exciting discussion today. Like I said, this is what I'm going to discuss today, and for BioVerse, we believe that's where science sparks a business in medicines. It's really founded by ISWT Trust Community. We call ourselves ISWT Community for short, which is a New Jersey-based nonprofit, serve the collaboration between the West and East biotech industry as well as pharmaceutical companies. And the BioVerse is really our flagship program. We also have our newsletter with a very funny name, Asian Biotech Walk into a Bar. Actually, we changed the name to Asian Biotech in a Bar because we don't want to leave. And we have many subscribers to both the webinar and our newsletter. Now we have over 4,000 active members, about half of them from North America, 45% of them from East Asia and Europe, and the remaining 5%, which is actually growing, from other territories. We also have another two collaborators. The second one is SAPA-GP, Central American Pharmaceutical Professional Associations, which could be the oldest, probably also largest ethnic Chinese focused pharmaceutical nonprofits. The third one is really actually based in Boston, far away from where Tess locates. It's called a BioSpark, which is really focused on academic research and R&D in the biotech industry. A little bit disclosure, you can read this quickly. We just have to show this because we have a lot of people from investment and public traded large pharma, and myself also advise a lot of public and private company. So please do not take our advice as an investment advice, and also the BioVerse does not endorse or kind of represent the opinion from the speakers. The opinions from speakers are really their own. And also, last but not least, also need to especially disclose I'm also the consultant, BD consultant for Mianus Accelerator, which sponsor our program. And with that, I actually like to give a little bit shout out to Mianus Accelerator, which is accelerated clinical development with a China speed. As you can tell, that's a kind of signature stuff from China, the bullet train. And this is a joint venture between Mianus Capital, which is a US-based PVC fund, and also Merit CRO, which is endpoint clinical imaging providers. How do they differentiate? It's really going to read quickly about how Mianus Accelerator, your trusted partner to really help you start your first in human, particularly investigator-initiated study in China, from four major value proposition. First, going to be easy when you work with the Mianus Accelerator. Is one master agreement, simplified execution. Second, going to be end-to-end clinical support. Third, you're going to have a priority access to clinical resources, especially in the Grieshaber-Bouyer area. And last but not the least, due to our DNA as a US-based and the US domicile companies, we do have a global collaboration on the local infrastructure. With that being said, it's my great honor to have all my friends and collaborators to share their view on this really exciting topics. Actually, from now on, I would invite each panelist to give a brief introduction of yourself. So I'm going to do from left to right. So Tess, you're going to be the first one.
Hi, Tess Cameron, Managing Director at RA Capital, a life sciences investment fund that we call ourselves a multi-stage fund because we invest in companies from very early stage companies and helping to build companies together with entrepreneurs through to investing in late stage public companies. Great to be on this call with you, Leon. Thank you.
Fantastic. So Yong-Jiang?
Hi, this is Yong-Jiang Hei. I'm the global CMO for CSPC, which is one of the big pharma in China. And I've been doing clinical development in the last almost 30 years, and being happy to be here to share with you some of the clinical development aspect in China.
Fantastic. Grace?
Hi, everyone. This is Grace Wang. I'm a partner from LEK Consulting based in Shanghai. So we are a global strategy consulting firm, and healthcare and life science is our largest practice. And last year, we have published a report on China clinical development in collaboration with Pharma DJ. So today, it's a pleasure for me to share some of the observations from the report and also to use that as a starting point for the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Oh, by the way, I want to give really a lot of the special thanks to both Grace and Yong-Jiang. Right now it's 11:07 p.m. in China. So thank you for your dedication. I do see a few actually audience also dial in from Asia. Thank you as well. Last, definitely not the least, Ricardo, please, a few words about yourself.
Hi, Ricardo Grieshaber-Bouyer. I'm a professor at FAU Erlangen and University Hospital Erlangen, one of the globally leading academic medical centers focused on early stage clinical studies and translational research. Pleasure to be here today.
Great. So I guess if in case the audience didn't realize, we actually scatter around the three major territories for biotech drug development. Tess and I in the US, and Grace and Yong-Jiang from China, and Ricardo actually from Germany. We're really like a truly global effort. With that being said, I will hand the baton to Grace. Grace, I can drive the slides for you. Please let me know if you want to me to move to the next slides. Here we go, Grace.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Just probably get started with a few quick stats to set up the context. So if we look at the clinical trial new starts in China, right? So clearly China has already established a very strong foundation for clinical trial growth. So today we are looking at a scale of around 2,600 newly started clinical trials. And the majority of them are contributed from Chinese companies. I think one thing to note is that just after a temporary dip during the COVID period, the clinical trial volume has quickly returned to growth in 2023, so indicating a very robust clinical trial ecosystem in China. So if we compare that to US and Europe, next slide, please. So as you can see, 6 to 7 years ago, the new trial starts in China is just 1/3 of the US level and half of the Europe level. But now, after 6 to 7 years, we are looking at a scale of a China level as 80% of the US level. And also the China new trial starts has already exceeded the European total trial starts each year. Which again indicates that very strong clinical trial development environment in China. And there is a number of strong underpinning factors. Favorable government policies is clearly one of the key drivers, which we can discuss later, but also sustained R&D investment from both Chinese biopharmas and biotechs, continued investment in innovation, are also very important drivers to underpin that growth. Next page, please. Then if we look into the trials from a therapeutic area standpoint, so clearly oncology still remains the larger therapeutic areas. But in the meantime, we've also seen emergent areas like immunology, endocrinology, neurology, cardiovascular, has also gaining more and more traction in terms of the newly started clinical trials. As you can see the CAGR here, so those areas clearly are the next wave of growth. Next page, please. I think lastly, the key thing here is I think everybody has already seen that big trend of China out-licensing to the global farmers, right? Especially if you look at the deal values. So the blue bar here indicates the total deal value from our licensing from Chinese biopharmas or biotechs. So if you just pay attention to the recent 5 years, right? If you take a look at the bar in 2021 and versus 2025, so clearly there's around 12 times in terms of deal value in 2025 as compared to 5 years ago. So clearly this is a very big trend indicating that the China innovation has been increasingly gained recognition from the global companies. All right. I think those are some stats just to set up the stage for this discussion.
Perfect. So I'm gonna pick up from what Grace laid us such a beautiful and really nice foundation. Extend a little bit so we can talk into a topic we're gonna discuss today. So two more slides from me. This one's really we already saw the tremendous increase of new trial start in China, which is pretty much a red line. Grace show up to 2024. Actually, 2025 they continue the red line, which is an industry sponsored trial. You may like what's going on with the blue line? That's actually the hidden secret, but not so much secret to everyone on this panel. We're gonna dissect this a little bit more. That's a so-called investigator-initiated trials in China, New Start. You can say actually it's outnumbered tremendously versus the industry-sponsored trial last year. But of course, the caveats, the majority of those trials are probably not interventional, just academics try to look at the correlation or biomarkers. But there are some of them are really evaluating the early stage, actually innovative asset from biotech or pharma companies. A matter of fact, if you look at the tiny, almost baseline over there, if you just pay attention to the numbers, the IITs which are evaluating the foreign assets, some of them actually sponsored by foreign company, are picking up, right? If you look at about 10 years ago, that's like only 39 of them. But last year is 173. I'm pretty sure this year it can be more than 173, based on what the people on this panel are aware of, right? So that's very interesting. How does this translate to another very interesting phenomenon? Grace already showed that China does have a hockey stick type of growth of a BDNL. I know Tess, you are Canadian, you probably know that very well. It's a real hockey stick. But how does that compare in terms of percentage of the total global BDNL? Wow, it's pretty shocking, I would say. Actually, in the past, I would say 2 years, there's a total reverse in terms of who is the dominant BDNL by total transaction value in the world. First of all, I want to caveat in terms of M&A, the US absolutely dominant, right? But if you look at the people argue the smaller value of deal making between like companies and sometimes big pharma or investment fund. China totally taking the lead, especially last year, 49%. I would argue based on the current 2 months of momentum, we are not even finished yet in 2026. I think this trend going to continue. Why do I say that? So let's do a quick snapshot. We just focus on a small slice of all those top 20 deals out of China by upfront payment. So I'm a deal maker myself. I already focus on upfront payment. By doing that, if you look at that, the top 20 deals, obviously they contribute to the significant portion of all the deals in the past, I would say 2 years and 2 months. As you can see, the upfront payment is already like over $13 billion and over 80 billion total value, dollars total value, or with the only top 20 deals out of China. And if you look at focus on 4 deals this year, right? That's highlighted right there. So you can understand why I'm so kind of bullish about this because we are only 2 months into 2026, and 4 out of the top 20 deals out of China since 2024 are in this year already. So I'll be not surprised, by the end of 2026, there's going to be more top 20 deals from this year. So the momentum is really strong. Hopefully that. Oh, so Kathleen, you are here. So
Hello.
probably you should I'll remove you. Thank you very much. So that's all I have for the presentation. But I think this is a great start for our following the panel discussion. I will stop sharing the slides, and now I'm gonna bring everyone to the panel discussion. The first question is really about where Grace already touched base a little bit about the policy and the infrastructure, which laid the foundation for the really robust clinical development in China. So my first question is, what structure and policy support have created this competitive edge? I know Grace already touched base a little bit. If I can cue you, you give a little bit more color about this, infrastructure, and also after that, if Yong-Jiang can add more, that would be great. So Grace.
Yeah, sure. I think talking about the policies, I think it has been continued support at least over the last decade for innovation in drugs. So I think the emphasis here is we've seen the government has adopted a concept of a so-called end-to-end all-chain support for innovative drugs. So essentially from financing to R&D to registration, and then for the pricing and market access. So along all of these critical steps, the government has issued specific favorable policies to encourage innovative drugs. Like, for example, in the development and registration stage, we've seen a further reduction in terms of the IND review timeline. And also for registration, there is a number of pathways to accelerate innovative drug registration in China. And then on the market access part, which is typically an important but could be a barrier for a high-price innovative drugs. So historically, the government has issued a number of policies to facilitate the market access for innovative drugs. For example, price negotiation for innovative drug inclusion into the reimbursement list, and facilitating hospital listing for the NRDO listed drugs. So there is a number of policies to support all of the critical go-to-market steps for innovative drugs. I think that's on the policy side. And then from an infrastructure side, what we've seen is there is a very vast expansion of the number of clinical trial institutions in China. I think we have some stats that now there is around 1,700 so regulatory filed clinical trial institutions in China. But if you look at like the number 5 years ago, it's clearly less than 1,000. So the very fast expansion in terms of the clinical trial sites is also another driver for that fast growth in the clinical trial development in China. Maybe I'll hand over to Yong-Jiang to see if any additional points.
Sure. I think from the 2 points in terms of the structural changes and also the policy-wise, number one, the policy has been really critical. I was in China since 2012, and with Amgen being expert to set up the clinical team in China for clinical trials, and the changes has been tremendous. It's a day and night in terms of how do you do studies in China 10 years ago compared to what's happening right now. I think the regulatory reform has been nothing short of a big revolution. The review time is a big thing. In 2012, I think it takes 2 to 3 years to get a clinical trial started. And nowadays, that we all know, it's really 60 working days, and the government is trying to even make that shorter than that. So that is a huge difference in terms of how you can start a clinical trial in China. I think from the structure aspect, there are many things that have been growing tremendously. For example, Grace mentioned the number of study centers, not only the number that has really increased, but also the quality, the capabilities have really grown hugely in the last 5 years or so. And if you look at the capabilities of the centers to do phase 1 studies. As you know, phase 1 trials are different from the phase 3 trials in terms of the capabilities, the experience of the PIs, and also the ability to be able to manage the potential safety issues coming from a novel drug in the early phase trials. And if you look at the situation 10 years ago, it's hard to find a good study center for phase 1 trials. But nowadays, I think there are many investigators, study centers, they're able to run phase 1 clinical trials. So the number and quality of study centers in China have grown quite a bit. And also the experience of the PI, the investigators, have really also been tremendous. If you look at the kind of knowledge, the experiences of the investigators in China nowadays are really they are top notch. And 10 years ago, it's not there's no comparison. And you can see that also from the kind of output, right? If you go to ASCO, ESMO, you have so many oral presentations coming from China for clinical trials nowadays, right? But if you go to ASCO 10 years ago, very few oral presentations would come from China. So that has been very visible changes. And also China has a tremendous big patient base that is also a big structure changes. Also the kind of ideology. How do we do clinical trials in China, and also the understanding of clinical trials in China from the patient perspective, whether we'll be a guinea pig or we actually are participating in the clinical research. The kind of changes in ideology from the patient perspective is also different. So with that, you can see there's a huge increase in the number for clinical research. The CROs, the CDMOs, right? They are getting big and also much more in China. Those also are part of the overall growth in terms of the biotech and the pharma industry. So those are some of the key aspects in terms of the structural changes and the policy changes that supported the tremendous growth in clinical development in China. So I'll add those points, Grace.
Yeah, you give a really good kind of overview why that's happening right now. So any other comments from Ricardo and Tess? Any curious question you want to have to this two experts here?
Yeah, I'm sure. So essentially, I think what you've described quite nicely is that it's not just one or two policy changes, but it's been essentially an intentional shaping of a powerhouse ecosystem over the past more than 1 decade, right? And I think this is really coming full circle now because you have, competent workforce and very deep know-how, but also very attractive early regulatory structures that allow hospitals to initiate investigator-initiated studies via hospital IRBs, so no central review, and this dramatically shortens timelines. And I think just makes early innovation much faster and ultimately reduces, in fact, the risks for the entire system because you can also explore ideas faster and you can fail faster. So this shows how essentially, if you implement the right policies, you can overall make the ecosystem very attractive and then gain that influx that makes it attractive essentially to test out new ideas.
Yeah, I would just build on what Ricardo just said, which is the importance of an iterative framework, right? Where, Leon, I know we'll get into some of the discussions of how this enables maybe a development path that, can be different from what is a more traditional, development path that we see for, and that you kind of have to do in the US. With the clinical trial efficiency and the cost base that you can manage in in China clinical trials that can enable this more iterative approach, right? Where you learn something from one trial and you say, okay, let me go back, let me improve on that, and let me take those learnings, let me make my drug even better, and let me test that improved compound in another trial. And we're really impressed with a lot of this more iterative development process that we see from many companies in China. And I think that's very much enabled by exactly the infrastructure, Yong-Jiang and Grace that you've mentioned.
Fantastic. All great points. We're probably gonna move on to other topics, just like your test said. In the meantime, so there's a questions from the audience just for your awareness due to the compliance. We're only gonna take people's with the name and the company disclosed. We will not take anonymous questions, and we'll, just for the sake of time, we're gonna answer all the questions after panel discussion. So please send your questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box. We're gonna put them together in the last 5 minutes. All right, let's move to next topic. So Tess, please stay with me. Next topic is like obviously you already mentioned, Ricardo also mentioned. So you travel to China extensively. Can you please compare the China clinical development or clinical trial system versus the US? If later on, Ricardo, you can compare that to the European system, especially German, that'd be great. I'll start with you, Tess.
Absolutely. So let's start with something that we just do not have, really a path for in the US, which is an IIT for products that have not been approved, right? That is something that is, really unique to the China ecosystem and really enables, an incredible amount of development on new modalities, right? In the cell and gene therapy world, we just see, a really astounding amount of, innovation and companies progressing forward. And this is something that's just fundamentally different, right? In the US, like what do you have to do? You have to do, IND pathway. And what that means is that in the US, typically the amount of investment that you're having to, put into a program to actually get that, IND, it's very extensive, right? And that creates very high barriers to entry, right? It's very difficult for companies to actually, accumulate all of that investment and actually get an IND open. And a lot of that is CMC related, right? CMC is a huge, huge part of that. And, what we sometimes get questions about that I think is a fundamental misunderstanding of the IIT pathway is sometimes, we will get questions, or I think there's, being questions within the US about like, okay, but, IITs in China, like how much can we really count on the data quality? Like how robust is really the process that went into that IIT? I think that what we've observed, at least from many of the hospitals and institutions that we've spoken with, is it can be a very robust process, right? Presumably, this is something that the institutions have a lot of oversight for, and so there may be variability institution by institution, but many of the top institutions, they have a very robust process for the IIT, and there's a lot of review of safety. There's a lot of discussion about the CMC process and ensuring that this is something that's going to be repeatable. And we have made investments that are, solely based on, underwriting to high quality data that has been generated in an IIT. I mean, going back to the days of Legend, we participated in, both the private financing and the IPO that was really based on IIT data, and also Gracell, that was a company that we invested in where that was really high quality IIT data that showed this was a drug that was likely to work not just in relapsed refractory multiple myeloma, but also had really impressive MRD data on newly diagnosed multiple myeloma, which is, a really important space for some of these therapies. So I think that is just a path that doesn't exist in the US, that is something, really powerful and really important. And it's just crucial to kind of recognize, an important role the institution plays in these IITs, and that those top-notch
Hmm.
institutions are really focused on sponsors that can generate
Hmm.
high quality data for those IITs. So I think that's one just fundamental difference, that coming back to what Ricardo, was talking about, this, getting to quick kind of answers on yes, no, and also getting to this like iterative process. That is something that we really see this IIT paradigm unlocking, and it fundamentally changes the investment landscape, right? Because what you can accomplish with an IIT that can de-risk a technology, much sooner than if you had to go through a whole IND process, and I think really enables a lot of innovation that we probably otherwise wouldn't see, including spaces very close to, some people on this call, Ricardo, like thinking about, the importance of IIT data in helping us better understand how some of these therapies may play out in different autoimmune indications. So that's one like really crucial difference. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about east to west differences in just the traditional IND pathway. And here is where, again, the investments that Grace and Yong-Jiang were talking about have, I think, also shifted some of the thinking on IND pathway and the benefits of including China in an IND path trial, or even, working with China on essentially getting a drug through proof of concept, right? Or, generating healthy volunteer data to advance, a compound through phase 1 in a very efficient way. I think the traditional view was that, oh, China's probably going to take longer to get started, and then you're going to make up for it on recruitment, right? And that was because it's only very recently that we have seen the 30-day IND review policy be instituted. And so it used to be that like it took a little bit longer to get things started. It took a little bit longer to have regulatory engagement, took a little bit longer to get sites up and running. But I think that is changing very rapidly as some of these policy shifts really try and pull in that startup timeline. And then, I think, hearing to everything that Grace and Yong-Jiang are saying, you're kind of like, well, why wouldn't you just, have China as like a really important part of your trial? Why wouldn't you like, try and do, more proof of concept testing in China based on, the strength of this clinical trial infrastructure? And indeed, I think that's a really good question. That's actually something that we ask a lot of our portfolio companies is like, why aren't you doing this trial in China? Or have you considered including China as part of your proof of concept study? Have you considered including China as part of your phase 3? And I think maybe a few years ago, the question would be like, why include China, right? And I think now it's kind of, why wouldn't you include China, right? Or why wouldn't you do some of this, de-risking work in China? And I think that comes down to like very kind of company and therapeutic specific reasons.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and some of the reasons that you may say, okay, maybe this needs to be a trial that is more weighted to a different patient population. Sometimes it's related to standard of care, and if standard of care is different, and you're looking for, a later line therapy where you want patients to have cycled through certain types of drugs, so that may be one. And then a second is just, maybe, scales where there's a lot of subjectivity, right? Where there may be a lot of subjectivity to those
Hmm.
scales, or there may be differences in interpretation of those scales. But even in like, some of the areas where you might say it's more subjective, right? Like, neuropsychiatry. We've actually seen some trials where like, indeed, the China portion of those trials have, closely replicated the US portion of those trials. And so I think it's important to understand that, like, well, maybe those are, reasons today that you have to really consider this patient population mix and background therapies and interpretation of scales. I think that those are also a lot of issues that investigators are really paying attention to and thinking through, and working towards having a more harmonized system, even on some of those, even on some of those aspects.
Fantastic. So actually, I'm gonna skip myself. I'm not going to contribute anything to this topic. Let's move on to next one. So actually, the next one, Tess, I'm probably gonna cue you later on, but I'll start with the probably Yong-Jiang and Grace, right? So I know you guys actually work with the Big Pharma, right? There's a lot of recent R&D deals with the top China biotech companies from Big Pharma, right? So the top really my question is like, why all of a sudden the Big Pharma prefer, not really prefer, have so many increase in number and big ticket R&D collaboration deal with the China biotech and biopharma. I mean, we can probably pinpoint the specific deal. Recently, Eli Lilly, right, had like this over 8 billion value deal with Innovent. And if you read the PR, there's no asset, nothing, no specific asset. Just said, oh, well, we're gonna do kind of a collaboration and co-develop the assay in immunology and oncology, and Innovent gonna bring from like early drug discovery all the way to phase 2. So I think that kind of a deal have quite a few. So probably I'll start with Yong-Jiang. Again, that's your company's not involved, so hopefully you have a little bit more freedom. Share your personal opinion.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting and exciting. I do believe it takes time to build the trust in terms of the capabilities and the data from China. I think I remember in 2012 when companies come to China, they look at the data, so, oh, can we really trust this? And if you see a PR, well, I mean, we want to see the CT scan. We want to be sure it is really a PR. I mean, there was really a lack of trust in terms of data from China. That's 15 years ago. Now it is an entirely different story. As I mentioned, that the capabilities in China have really been enhanced in the last 5, 10 years, and the R&D quality has increased tremendously. One thing I can mention for our company, CSPC, as you can see, very, very strong R&D platform, which is why AZ is being working with CSPC on multiple collaborations on platforms as well as products. I think for Eli Lilly and Innovent, certainly it is not the first deal, right? They've been working on quite a few collaborations. This is the seventh deal between Eli Lilly and Innovent. Obviously, the other deals were more like a later stage, sort of for clinical stage assets. And this one, as you mentioned, Leon, it's a early stage. It's a discovery and to phase 2 and phase 2 kind of a collaboration. So it's a early stage kind of for collaboration where Eli Lilly must feel that the R&D quality, the kind of work they can really trust. So to me, that is one of the main reasons. The other one, obviously, is not only from Innovent, but many other companies in China that have indeed produced a first-class, sort of first-in-class molecules, right? If you look at all the PD-1 and VEGF as examples, right, and the bispecifics, the ADCs, many of them are really sort of best-in-class or first-in-class molecules. Those are certainly visible evidence that the many assets, the data are trustworthy in China. The other one you can see the trend is that if you look at 5 years ago to do a deal with an asset from China, you question, well, do you have data in US? Do you have data ex-China, right? And those are essential in terms of being able to do a deal between MNC and a Chinese company. But I think nowadays this requirement is no longer that essential. I do believe, of course, it's a bonus if you have data from China and from ex-China regions, because you do have the diversity, right? But even if you have data only from China, I think the companies from US and other region will still be looking at those data as perhaps a reason to do a deal. So I'm saying that, again, it's evidence that the quality and the confidence in the data from China really has been tremendously enhanced. So that's in my view one of the big reasons why you have so many companies wanting to do deals with China in the recent years. So I'll stop here. And Grace?
Yeah, I think Yong-Jiang has already covered that pretty well. So I think it's mainly as a result of the enhanced trust. And in the meantime, the multinationals who like to tap into the local capabilities early.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to further reinforce like that I thought this Lilly Innovent deal was a very creative and interesting structure that really leverages exactly the kind of clinical capability that we're talking about, right? It's very interesting. I mean, obviously Lilly has enormous clinical development capacity and capability globally. And it's, I think really interesting and, credit to Lilly and Innovent for thinking creatively. It's really interesting to see, Leon, exactly what you highlighted, that Innovent is going to be bringing these forward to proof of concept, at which point, that becomes something that presumably Innovent and Lilly can think about moving forward with, on a global basis.
And I think
I
also
will, I will say, because I know Young-Jin may be limited in what he can share about CSPC, but being at the company, but as someone sitting outside and seeing the multiple partnerships that CSPC and AstraZeneca have embarked on in several different spaces, but LP little a, AI drug discovery more generally, and then more recently a really monster obesity deal, that really shows the power of CSPP's, discovery and development platform in enabling, some of these very large indications for another global player. So I think it's great to see some of these deals that are getting well beyond just like, oh, like individual assets, right? And they're actually, we're seeing a lot more that is geared towards, capabilities and platforms beyond individual assets, which is really really fantastic to see.
Great. So we have a case study of a deal. That's a case study of a specific area. If not the hardest, one of the hardest in our industry. It's about B-cell depletion for autoimmune diseases, particularly in vivo CAR T and T-cell engager. That's why we have Ricardo here. He's one of the most influential KOL in this space. So probably Ricardo, if you can tell us, your pretty impressive journey in this space and your few encounters and ongoing work with the Chinese, kind of academics, physician scientists in this space, that would be great. Now we can expand probably other people, other speakers gonna ask you a few questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we saw, also in the deals made in this space, I&I has really had kind of an explosion of interest over the past few years. It's one of the hottest and fastest growing areas. And if we think about the specific area of the B-cell depletion, which is essentially a category that has transformed how we think about autoimmune diseases and how we think about going potentially from chronic suppression to one and done therapies. If we just think back a few years, since 2022, we know that CAR T cells can be used for deep B-cell depletion, and that can potentially flatline multiple autoimmune diseases for several years. 2 years later, since 2024, we have proof of concept of doing deep B-cell depletion using T-cell engagers. So T cells already within the body and essentially using small peptides, antibodies, or fragments of antibodies to link two cells together. And then since 2025, we have in vivo proof of concept using in vivo CAR T-cell therapy. So all of this has essentially come together in a very short amount of time. And there are some very interesting trends to watch. So when we think about the first proof of concept that came out of Erlangen, our institution, And I think that was essentially possible also by, I would say, the rather innovation-friendly ecosystem that we have here in Germany, where early clinical development is possible and is not over-regulated and not punished. And the same was in fact true for T-cell engagers. In the case actually for TCEs, there was vast safety data already because we were using drugs that were approved for hemato-oncology, so blinatumomab and teclistamab. So we had an idea of how to go about the dosing without exposing patients to overarching risk. And I think that's always important to keep in mind when you're doing early clinical development. So of course, you're going after that proof of concept, but you need to have an idea where to anchor dosing strategies. And then in 2025, what's interesting is essentially trend reversal that the in vivo POC originated from China and was essentially a close collaboration, of course, also with our side, but the patients were treated in China. And so I think this shows that essentially within that short amount of time, not just have we seen a number of assets being developed and also transacted in licensing deals, such as Curon Merck, for instance, or Chimagen GSK. But also, I think we've seen that now these assets are being tested very early in a very active space in the Chinese ecosystem, generating data that is essentially further help evaluate early development strategies. And I think for instance, when you think about how to leverage that ecosystem quite effectively, if you think about the IIT structure, I think that gives essentially investigators the possibility to bring innovative medicines faster to patients. It's highly attractive for the hospitals as well to be leading in the innovation space. And then also, I think it's attractive for the biotech sponsors because essentially they have a very efficient way to get to early POC. And in some of these indications, it's really just about a handful of patients that are required to see early PD data. And if you're thinking about black and white outcomes, then really after a handful of patients, you learn about whether it works or if it doesn't work. And so this has really helped, I think, accelerate the space. Another example where we've participated, and I think that's also an example of how essentially data from China can help development outside of China, is with a BCMA T-cell engager called Sisutamig, which is right now being developed by Candid. So actually that molecule fell into our hands in late 2024. And at that point, there was no data in autoimmune disease. It was really only being developed in multiple myeloma. And we had already extensive experience using another BCMA engager called teclistamab, which is approved. And essentially, we were faced with a choice of whether to, for that specific patient population that we had been treating, continue using teclistamab, with which we had experience, but we also knew about the liabilities of the molecule. For instance, a rather high rate of CRS, all limited to lower grades, but nevertheless a very predictable CRS rate. The preclinical data from Sisutamig looked more compelling, and for instance had similar cytotoxicity but lower cytokine release. And there was also depletion data from a humanized mouse model, and I think data from about 60 patients with myeloma. So you can see kind of where this goes. Essentially, we had the entire preclinical package to look at and to really de-risk essentially this N of 1 study then where we used it in a patient with autoimmune disease and applied that drug successfully for the first time in Erlangen. And actually, we've been using it ever since. And the safety profile has panned out, which essentially shows that you can greatly accelerate development of really innovative medicines by just looking at the totality of data And that dosing can then really inspire also and improve your decision making by looking at doses that had been safely tested in the hematologic setting, for instance. And that essentially shows, I think, how you can bridge the innovation ecosystems and then bring innovations also to Europe and the US.
Yeah, fantastic. So probably I give a little bit of color. Please feel free to add on it about the in vivo CAR T for B cell depletion, right? Both for autoimmune diseases and immunology. So I just talked to someone really knowledgeable in this space from China. She told me, 2 weeks ago, published a newsletter based on public disclosed information. There are over 60 program or company working on this. Actually, my source told me in China is over 200 companies working on in vivo CAR T program, and both in lentiviral, which is a kind of the technology similar to SO Biotech, or LNPMR, which is similar to Capstan, right? So over 200 companies. And I also asked her how many are in the clinic. She says like over 20. Right. So that should tell you how much information they are collecting. But of course, the caveat is, I also know majority of them just fast follow. That's unfortunate. That's a one downside of a China biotech. The herd mentality is like kind of a times 10 compared to the US. Later, probably Yong-Jiang can talk about it. That's one. But if you think about in vivo CAR T right now, we already saw 5 major M&A by Big Pharma in less than 12 months. No, J&J also pretty advanced with their partnership. We don't know J&J can acquire their partner or not. And I also heard pretty much all the other major pharma, if they have an ambition in oncology and particularly immunology, are looking as well. I'm pretty sure Tess, all of them. So if you think about it, China have such a robust, despite probably some of them not efficient, such a robust infrastructure. How can you not do this? Just like Tess said, how can you not test your developed drug in vivo CAR T in China? Like, Ricardo gave a perfect example of a T cell engager. If you are in this red hot, uber competitive space, if you leave China out of your equation, that's very hard to win. I think that's just, like I said, in this case, especially in vivo CAR T, leveraging China or access in China is a necessity. It's not a luxury. You cannot live without. That's my 2 cents.
I think that's totally right, Leon, but I also think that these are essentially assets that originated in China. So I think that the reverse translation actually of testing in first in human IITs assets in China that have not originated there is something you showed that nicely at the beginning. The trend is accelerating, but it's still less than 2% of overall IIT volume. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction.
Right.
And I think that has to do with many things, like there's potential IP concerns, but we also
Correct.
think overall there is smoother regulatory pathways for definitely for medicines produced locally, and rightfully so, right? I mean, there is a strong innovation ecosystem. It should protect their local players. And I think that's essentially a blueprint from which all countries could learn, right? The US could learn from that, and European countries could learn from that as well. Because what we're doing is essentially making one or another aspect of that value chain really hard, right? So for instance, in US biotechs, you have strong innovation power, but then clinical development in the US is just terribly slow. So the question is, why do we do this? Why do we do this to companies that originate in the US, right, with American capital, that are trying to develop there and simply cannot, and that are then turning to Australia or, for instance, to Europe to do first in human studies, or maybe in the future to China. And I think the same is true when we look at Germany, where we have a different issue, right? We have a favorable ecosystem for early clinical development. That's certainly possible to do it in a cost-efficient way and in an agile way. But we are not funding enough biotechs, right? Even though we have more than enough good ideas from academics, but we just don't have analysts that know how to value it. We don't have sufficient innovation capital. We don't have the entrepreneurial spirit overall in many faculties. So that also makes it hard. So essentially, it's an ecosystem where you can test other people's drugs, but then you're wondering, okay, why not test more of the drugs that might have originated here? So it's like, I think when we look at this whole trend, I think overall it's just a perfect blueprint that shows, yes, you can turn on multiple levers and then make an ecosystem that is just highly attractive to foster innovation, not just locally, but even for innovation coming in from outside. And that should serve as a blueprint for essentially what we should do if we want to be able to keep up and compete on a global scale.
Perfect. We're a little bit behind schedule. I really want Yong-Jiang and Grace go to sleep a bit early, not too late. So next question, we have been talking about this IIT for a long time. I know Yong-Jiang, you're most knowledgeable person for this topic. I'll give you a couple of minutes to tell us the mini review. Where does IIT sit in China? Where does it come from? What's like, principle of why the country designed such a system?
Right. I think this is really kind of interesting to make IIT such a centerpiece of our discussion here because IIT really is nothing new. IT is everywhere. But if we come down to the fundamental concept, IT simply is investigator-initiated trials, right? And the what's unique in China is, IND, the IT without IND. Okay, that is the key differentiation point between China and all the other countries, right? Why is that? I mean, I think Tess mentioned earlier about IIT it's in China, but it's everywhere, right? But the IND, the IIT without IND, that's something which is unique to China. And let me maybe take a step back in terms of okay, what is it the IIT compared to the Europe to US IIT? In US you can do IIT all very easy, right? IIT whether it's approved drug or not, you can do IITs in US. And if it's not approved, you just have to reference that the IND on file at the FDA. If it's approved, you can use the drug label to support your IIT by an investigator. And in the US, IITs are hands-off for companies, right? The companies provide the study drug, maybe some funding, and the investigator is the person to run studies. Now, the same concept still is also in China, but in China, there's a different system, which is you have a so-called dual track, right? You have a track with the IND, with the Chinese regulatory agency, and then PA/CDE. So that's like very similar to US. You can do IND, but the IIT for the unapproved drug, you cannot really do IITs in China. Okay, I want to make it very clear. Only for cell therapy products, say CAR T and other cell therapy and gene therapy or CGT products, it's possible to take a separate pathway, which is the IIT in the absence of an IND. And that pathway goes through this so-called the National Health Commission system. And those are the government agency that regulates the hospitals in China. Okay, so it's not really a drug regulatory agency, but it's the agency that governs the hospital systems in China. So for cell therapy products, you can go to do IIT when you have the approval by the hospital, their scientific committee, the ethical committee, and then you can have this sort of filing with the National Health Commission, right? 卫健委 in Chinese, without the IND. So for that pathway, you do not need IND. That is the system that's unique to China. So for sponsors, if you have a cell therapy products, you can take this approach to do studies very quickly in human. So because as Tess mentioned, to do IND, right, it's a quite involved, complicated process, right? The CMC aspect is actually quite sort of difficult, right? To be able to get an IND, and you need to do a lot of work. But in order to have a proof of concept, to see if your product is effective, is it safe, is it possible to become a drug, you can go through this IIT without IND in China. And that's why the cell therapy has been a very strong aspect for Chinese drug development. That's also why cell therapy in China is a leading country to do cell therapy. Okay, so I want to make that clear. The IIT in China, there are two different pathways, and for drugs, you can't really do IIT without an IND. Okay, so I want to say for small molecule, for example, and also let me also take a step back about the policy, right? So what policies exist to govern IITs in China? Before 2021, there is no clear policy in China on IIT regulation. In 2021, the policy came out, and that was updated in 2024. Okay, but if you look at the policy, it says that you can only do IIT on drugs after they're approved. Okay, but for cell therapy, because of a different track, it was done under the National Health Commission pathway, where IND is not required. However, that kind of a difference makes it possible to do POC studies much earlier for cell therapy products. Once you see this drug or this cell therapy works, and you can then collect the data from IITs, you can then use the data to file IND, to go through the R&D process to make the cell therapy a drug, okay, a drug as a product to sell to market in China. Now, we also need to note just recently this new policy 818, right? So 818 decree just came out, and it's going to be implemented from May 1st this year. It's new. This came out specifically to govern so-called medical technology, right? Novel medical technology. And mainly in our situation, it's the cell therapy products. Okay. Now, what it says here is that it opens up another pathway for potential commercialization of products in this new system, right? So let me also make it very clear, right? In the past, for cell therapy to become a drug, to be commercialized, you must go from IIT to IND, then to BLA, right? Then become a drug. Now, with this new policy 818, which is yet to be implemented from May 1st, you can do IIT, okay, without IND, right, under this system. And then you have data from your IIT. This data can support sort of approval of this treatment, but only in hospitals, qualified, right? The tier 3A hospitals. You can then start to market, commercialize this product, but it's not really a drug, right? It's still not a drug, but it's a therapy that's available only in qualified hospitals. But you can see this will be much faster than IND, right? You imagine you can do a study with IIT, you get data, you get a quick approval, and then your therapy can become commercially available in the major tier 3A hospitals. Okay, that is the essence of this 818 new policy that yet to come. So you can imagine, right, when that happens, you could make the cell therapy products available to patients actually through this as a drug, sort of like, right? So you don't have this drug number, but you can already make the product available in the major hospitals. Now, if you want your therapy to become universally available everywhere, you still have to go through IND approach and get approval using robust clinical data that's going to meet the criteria of an BLA. So that is again longer, much more complicated process. So the basic concept is the IIT in China is a unique pathway without the IND. And that's only because of this dual track system here in China. Okay, so I want to make that, that is really the situation. One big difference between the IITs in China and the US, I think one thing Tess mentioned earlier was about the quality, right? Can we trust quality from IITs? I think the reason those data are very robust is because those are the cell therapy IITs in China. A lot of those actually are conducted with a lot of help from the sponsors. Okay, as mentioned in the U.S., in theory, IITs are supposed to be hands-off from the perspective of the sponsors, right? Because the sponsor of the trial is the investigator, not the company. Okay, so the companies can provide input, ideas, free drug, and maybe some funding, but they're not supposed to be sort of heavy-handed in terms of the IIT study conduct in the US. Okay, but in China for cell therapy only, in the absence of R&D, those IITs can be done with a lot of input from the sponsor, not only the product, not only the funding, but also the conduct. So that is the difference also between IITs in US and China. That's also why the IIT data from China on cell therapy are pretty robust. I think those data are very strong because of the help from the sponsors in China. So I hope I make that clear in terms of why IITs in China are different for cell therapy.
Yeah,
And you just
fantastic.
have to make, I'm sorry, I think the whole concept of having this IIT where you can then be sold in a hospital is just another like really novel. It comes back to Ricardo's point about an ecosystem that is really incentivizing innovation, right? And that is such a novel and thoughtful approach. Um, and I think one of the best things that can come out of all the innovation that we're seeing in the clinical trial ecosystem in China is that more countries are like, oh, wow, you can do this, right? Like, I would love to see, the FDA has been talking about like, how do we improve timelines to first in human? Like, fantastic. Like, let's have more regulatory agencies really thinking about how they can, encourage this innovation and not just regulatory, right? But it's also hospital incentives to do more clinical trials. Like it's so many different aspects of the ecosystem, and it would be wonderful to see, this ecosystem just inspire more countries to think about how they can, similarly encourage innovation.
Yes, indeed. I think as you may have seen the discussions about how do we make FDA to sort of learn from China to make the IT cell therapy regulations maybe more relaxed. Maybe it's easier for companies to do cell therapy studies in the US. So yes, there were these kind of discussions. I think perhaps there will be some potential changes there, as you've seen that there's discussion between FDA and the Congress, and also there's this just to come out something new from the FDA about this ultra rare disease. How do we make the sort of regulations more relaxed for this ultra rare disease? As what kind of data we need to be able to approve a drug for those rare situations.
All right. I guess if we don't control time, we're gonna talk another 2 hours. Let's make sure our audience and our speaker from Asia still have time to sleep. I'm gonna combine the last two questions together. So that's gonna be our last question. So this is gonna be our closing synthesis, but with a focus to advise the Western biotech companies. I think a big pharma from the West, they've largely figured out, but the Western biotech company probably still try to look at how they can leverage this. With that in mind, please share your closing remark and start from the screen from my left to right. The first one going to be Ricardo. What's your advice to Western biotech companies or academics in your case to really leverage the early stage clinical development capability of China?
Yeah, I think really it's about seeing all the pieces as an integrated ecosystem. So the biotechs, the academics, the hospitals, the patients, regulatory authorities, and the investors are all part of one ecosystem. And I think it's about creating aligned incentives. I don't think that the innovation in China is in any way a threat. I think right now it's really a role model that should inspire all of us to work harder and rethink our practices. I think it's making innovation faster for patients, for areas of unmet need. I think it's really inspiring lots of innovation around the globe. And I think it has tremendous potential for collaborations, both on the academic side, but also on the business side.
Yeah, next I'm gonna invite Tess, share your hopefully 1 minute closing remark with advice to Western biotech, please.
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate the point that I think that it's wonderful to see how much innovation China is really incentivizing at a system level, right? On how do you encourage more clinical trials from multiple different standpoints. And I do really think that one of the best things that can come from this is more countries and more regulators really drawing from that experience and learning from it, and embarking on similar reforms that can really enable more drugs to be tested and come to market.
Great. So, Yong-Jiang, Yong-Jiang, you mute yourself.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so maybe quickly for a Western biotech company to sort of tap into the capabilities in China, I think the best thing to do, in my view, is to form a partnership with a company in China. I think that's because there are a lot of the expertise that's happening in China. It's not something you can come in and do it quickly without the help from the local entity. For example, whether it's a biotech company, whether Big Pharma or it's a CRO maybe. So I think the form a strong partnership with a Chinese local company might be the best approach.
Great. So, Grace, I give the final words to you.
Yeah, I think it's really need to think about how to use China as a speed and scale lever. But in the meantime, also you need to be selective to really think about the assets and indications where China really has a unique advantage in terms of patient recruitment speed or the quality.
Perfect. So my 2 cents is really self-interest. People should join ISWT Community. We have so many experts from every single aspect of this whole system, not only from China but also from the West, like expert like Tess, like Yong-Jiang, Ricardo. Right. So they know the West and East very well. So join us, join the discussion, and they're gonna find a lot of partners right here. With that being said, we said there's a lot of questions actually during the webinar. I'm gonna pick a few of them because I promise we should finish everything 90 minutes. I'll probably try everything in 95 minutes or 98 minutes. So I'm gonna pick a few questions. The first one probably to Ricardo. Again, please be concise. So I guess this Laura, she's from German. She said, beside the policy and regulatory framework, how do the centers ensure patient recruitment? In her experiences, for example, in Germany, and that's why I ask you, a lot of centers can be activated, but the recruitment of patient per center is very low. What can Germany learn from China in this regard?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I have a role model answer. I think patient recruitment overall is one of the inefficiencies in the system. I think, again, about incentives, I think making incentives in a way that opening centers is not very strongly incentivized, but delivering on recruitment is essentially one lever. And then I think in tendency, IITs tend to recruit much faster because you really have investigators prioritizing those studies. So I think that is part of essentially what's going on. And then also having well-characterized patient cohorts that are clinical trial ready, essentially knowing what to expect also helps, right? And there are some centers in China, obviously, with hundreds of thousands of outpatients a year. That, of course, also helps. Yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, another question very relevant. So China's from Rainer Henning. China's PI will have a huge number of projects select for starting on IIT. What are the major drivers to get them excited about a specific project? So I guess that is probably really relevant to everyone. So if you want to respond, please be concise.
I will only share what I have heard, which is just drugs that you want to get approved if they work, right? Versus something that's more, experimental and maybe, just for publication, but also publication, right? So, a drug that can, hopefully get approved and, a drug that is really exciting and so can support, a publication that, shows the investigators, contribution to, their domains of interest.
Yeah, my two quick senses since like I said, disclosure, I'm the BD consultant of this Mianus Accelerator. So I've been talking to the leading hospital in Shanghai area, a dozen of them already. So for Shanghai, I think they probably have the some of the highest, if not the highest, healthcare and physician scientist training level. So for them, they really have they are the preferred choice for not just a China biotech company, but also international company to do IIT with them. So the supply and demand is definitely favor the supply, right? The demands are way bigger than the supply. So you really want to stand out, right? Keep in mind what Yong-Jiang mentioned, the dual track, right? The hospital actually have a very important role other than PI. The hospital need to say whether, this IT can help them. They say, finally get the drug approved down the road. They're going to benefit their patients. Hopefully also bring some financial incentive as well. So keep that in mind. I totally agree with the test. If you just, go to China, try something weird or like a crazy, good luck. I don't think, you would find a good hospital to take your cases. It's not like that anymore. All right. So another questions, can we discuss this from Carlos Loya? Can we discuss more about the key concern from US and European innovator to conduct IIT in China, particular IP? How are those concerns potentially mitigated? I think that's a really, really important question.
The main area that I hear about IP concerns is mainly as it relates to, CMC, especially if you need to do some of the CMC locally, which you would if you are a ex-US company that is, looking to partner with, say, a local pharma bio, a local pharma biotech in order to do the, IIT. So CMC is a big one, and then kind of like proprietary assays, right? If you have proprietary assays, and I think it all comes down to like trusted partner, right? Like, do you have a trusted partner? Who is the, biotech who you're working with? Who are the business advisors, Leon and other groups who Leon works with. Leon, I don't know if you got my disguised reference there, but basically, who are the business partners, and do they have like a long-term interest in working with you so that your IP is protected, and are they working on competitive programs? These are some of the key things that I think that you want to really understand and try and pressure test. But we've seen a lot of companies like, let's look at Orna, right? That Lilly transaction, over $2 billion, right? And they had, a great biotech partner who they were working with in China to generate
Right.
data, and that data presumably, supported a great acquisition by Lilly. So, there's a lot of things that I think, we can worry about, right? But it comes down to like, how do you really get specific about the concerns and then figure out the way to manage those concerns. And I think, trusted partners are a really important part of that.
Fantastic. So this last question I have to take this is from my good friend Andrew Marshall. Actually, he had been the chief editor of a Nature Biotech for 20 years. So we know each other for a long time. So his question really relevant. So for Andrew, could the panel discuss a likely competitive implication of IIT for cell and gene therapy startup in China versus ex-China? And today, Chinese innovation has largely been around the validated target. Does accessibility to IT in China translate into much more Chinese innovation around new target biology going forward in cell and gene therapy and maybe in vivo CAR T? My quick answer is yes, but I'll let other people chime in.
My quick answer would be maybe. I mean, we've seen mostly fast followings, but obviously very exciting to continue to watch the space and see also new targets.
Yep, I would also say something that we say all the time as an investment fund is past performance does not indicate future performance. I think this is also very, very true of China, right? Like if you had said 5 years ago, well, like China isn't doing a lot of partnerships with MNCs today, you would have, missed a lot of great activity. So I really don't think that we should underestimate the, entrepreneurship and willingness to take risk and also strong science that we see coming out of the biotech ecosystem in China and how that could support first-in-class, development in future. We certainly do see, some of that, including today.
Yeah, maybe also quick word. I think right now it's kind of not very many novel targets being done in China, but I do believe there will be some in the future. But we all know that China is very strong in terms of being able to take something from 1 to 10 to 100, right? But from 0 to 1, I think it's still something that China will have to improve in the future. I do believe, but it will come in eventually.
Yeah, so I wanna like add on what Yong-Jiang said, right? So obviously China historically has not been very good and from 0 to 1, but just keep in mind that based on Nature Index, right, which is a kind of track the top publications around the world, China became #1 in 2024, right? Actually, right now the gap between China and the US, which is the second, is pretty big. And remember, the chief editor, editor-in-chief on Science, in his recent Substack said that in Science, for example, they have a second-tier publication called Science Advances. China already passed the US by a huge margin, and he expects China going to pass the US in 1 or 2 years. So just keep that in mind. But obviously, there's a gap in terms of talents and infrastructure to do this nature paper to start up translation, which it tests. I know you guys are very, very good and in Boston, so probably you should go to China, help those professors to convert their nature paper to next Moderna, for example. In the meantime, that's all we have for today, and thank you very much. There's 2 more episodes coming in March and April, and if you have any questions, please send us an email right here. The recording going to be posted on our YouTube channel later today. And if you want a copy of a presentation, please email us and this email address, contact@iswtc.org. And thank you very much, especially Yong-Jiang and Grace for stay over 12 p.m. That's really appreciate that. Sorry, 12 a.m. And also thank you all the audience, especially those dialed in from Asia. Thank you for your dedication. With that being said, happy belated Chinese New Year, and I will see you again next month. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.
See
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.